Emily Davis, at 32 years old, felt the weight of every night shift at the hospital, but also the lightness of a dream almost within reach. Her blue eyes, almost the color of the ocean, reflected the determination of someone who had always had to fight for every achievement. She was a nurse, a profession she chose not only out of passion, but for its ability to offer care and dignity to those who needed it most. Her modest salary secured a small rented apartment in the suburbs, where the thin walls barely muffled the city noise, but the wide windows allowed the morning sun to flood the living room, a daily reminder of new beginnings. This Saturday evening, however, the setting was different. A luxurious restaurant, with crystal chandeliers sparkling like stars and silver cutlery arranged with military precision, seemed a distant universe from her daily life. It was the engagement dinner, the day Emily and Michael Sterling would officially seal their commitment. Michael, 33 years old, the only son of Richard and Eleanor Sterling, came from a family that represented everything Emily did not know: generational wealth, surnames that opened doors, and a lifestyle where luxury was the rule, not the exception. He was kind, attentive, and loved her in a way that made her believe that perhaps love could bridge any social barrier. But there was something in Michael, an almost imperceptible hesitation, a boyish gaze that still sought approval, which sometimes unsettled her. Sarah Miller, her best friend since nursing school, always told her to pay attention to the small signs. Sarah, a lawyer with her firm demeanor and easy laugh, was Emily's safe harbor, the voice of reason that, every now and then, managed to pop the bubble of optimism in which Emily lived. Sarah, who was sitting at the round dinner table, observed the scene with a hint of concern. The elegant murmur of the restaurant was suddenly broken when Richard Sterling, Michael's father, stood up for a toast. He was an imposing man with impeccably gray hair and an expensive suit whose gaze assessed everyone in the room. He smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and raised his champagne flute. "I would like to toast the future of my son, Michael, and his fiancée, Emily. May this union bring him the stability and convenience he so eagerly seeks." The word convenience echoed in the air, cold and sharp. Emily felt her stomach churn. She exchanged a glance with Michael, who smiled back, a forced smile, as if he hadn't noticed the offense. Richard continued, his voice growing louder and more sarcastic. "After all, it's not every day a Sterling marries someone who has absolutely nothing to offer, besides a beauty that, we know, is fleeting. I hope she knows how to value what my son can give her, and doesn't forget that our family's money doesn't grow on trees to support opportunists." The words fell like stones. An awkward silence settled over the table. Emily felt her face burn, her dignity crushed under the weight of that public humiliation. Her gaze shot to Michael, seeking refuge, a spark of indignation, a sign that he would defend her. But Michael was there, standing, champagne in hand, his eyes fixed on the flute. 1 second, 2, 3 seconds, and then a nervous giggle escaped his lips, an almost inaudible sound, but one that to Emily sounded like thunder. There was no defense. There wasn't even a look of disapproval for his father. Michael's uncomfortable laugh was the final blow, the seal of indifference that hurt more than any insult. In that instant, Emily felt a strange strength well up from within, a flame of self-respect that refused to be extinguished. She remembered the phrase her grandmother, a simple and wise woman, always used to say, "Dignity cannot be bought, it is carried." The engagement ring on her finger felt like it was burning. She could no longer breathe in that suffocating environment. The clinking of glasses, the hushed whispers of the other guests, all faded into a blur as she felt a primal urge to escape. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to leave, to reclaim the dignity that had just been so carelessly trampled upon. The shimmering chandeliers, the exquisite table settings, the very air of wealth and privilege that had once seemed so alluring now felt stifling, oppressive. She thought of her small apartment, the simple life she had built with her own hands, and suddenly it seemed infinitely more valuable than all the sterling fortune. A quiet resolve hardened in her eyes. This was not the life she envisioned, not the partnership she deserved. The silence from Michael, his awkward laugh, spoke volumes, revealing a deeper truth about his character and their relationship than any shouted argument ever could. This wasn't just about his father's words. It was about Michael's inability to stand by her, to protect her from harm. The dream she had cherished, the future she had so carefully constructed in her mind, was crumbling before her eyes, revealing a foundation built on shaky ground. The weight of his inaction was heavier than any insult. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she could not build a life with a man who would not stand up for her. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken truths. Emily, feeling the engagement ring on her finger like a brand, slowly, deliberately, slid it off. The diamonds, meant to symbolize an unbreakable bond, now felt cold and heavy in her palm. With a quiet strength that surprised even herself, she placed the ring carefully on the pristine white tablecloth, directly in front of Michael's untouched champagne flute. Her gaze met his, unwavering, though her heart was a chaotic drumbeat against her ribs. She saw a flicker of panic in his eyes, but it was too late. The unspoken question in his gaze, "What are you doing?" was met with the silent answer in hers, "I am choosing myself." Without another word, without a glance at Richard Sterling's sneering face or Eleanor Sterling's shocked expression, Emily turned. Her back was ramrod straight as she walked away from the table, past the hushed conversations, the curious stares, and the glittering facade of the luxury restaurant. The clinking of cutlery, the soft jazz music, all seemed to fade into a distant hum as she moved towards the exit, every step a declaration of her newfound resolve. The cool night air hit her face like a slap, a refreshing shock after the suffocating warmth of the restaurant. Tears, hot and stinging, finally breached the dam she had held so tightly. She stumbled onto the sidewalk, the city lights blurring through her watery vision. Her phone buzzed. It was Sarah. "Emily, what happened? Are you okay?" Sarah's voice was laced with frantic concern. Emily could only manage a choked sob. I can't, Sarah. I just can't." Sarah, ever the pragmatic one, immediately understood. "Where are you? Stay right there. I'm coming to get you." Within minutes, Sarah's reliable beat-up sedan pulled up to the curb. Emily scrambled into the passenger seat, burying her face in her hands as Sarah pulled away, leaving the opulent restaurant behind. The next few days were a blur of raw emotion. Emily curled up in her small apartment, the silence amplifying the echo of Richard Sterling's cruel words and Michael's deafening inaction. She replayed the scene endlessly in her mind, dissecting every glance, every silence. The humiliation was a burning ember in her chest, but beneath it, a tiny spark of something else began to glow. Anger. Not just at Richard, but at Michael. How could he have stood by? How could he have let his father debase her so utterly, then respond with a nervous laugh? The questions gnawed at her, eroding the love she thought was so strong. She felt a profound sense of betrayal, a crack in the foundation of trust she had so carefully built with Michael. This wasn't just about a bad night. It was about a fundamental flaw in his character, a weakness she hadn't fully grasped. The calls and texts from Michael began almost immediately. He was apologetic, desperate, trying to explain away his father's behavior as just Richard being Richard. He claimed he was shocked, that he didn't know how to react, that he loved her, and wanted to make things right, but his explanations rang hollow. Emily remembered her grandmother's words, a quiet whisper in her mind. Actions speak louder than any apology. Michael's inability to defend her, To prioritize her dignity over his father's approval was a gaping wound. He even suggested that maybe she had overreacted, that she should have just ignored his father. This suggestion only fueled Emily's anger, showing her that he still didn't grasp the depth of the insult, or her profound need for respect. The pressure from his family was palpable, even through the phone. She heard his mother Eleanor's soft voice in the background once, pleading with him to fix this, confirming her suspicion that Eleanor was also trapped in Richard's web of control. One afternoon, Michael showed up at her apartment, flowers in hand, his face etched with concern. He tried to embrace her, but Emily recoiled. "Michael," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, "this isn't just about what your father said. It's about what you didn't do." He looked bewildered, truly unable to comprehend the chasm that had opened between them. "I love you, Emily. We can get past this. Please, just come back. My father will apologize. I promise." But Emily knew an empty promise when she heard one. The lack of conviction in his voice, the desperate plea for her to return to a situation where her value was constantly under scrutiny, solidified her resolve. The image of the ring on the table, a tiny disk of gold and diamond abandoned, replayed in her mind. It was a symbol of her walking away from a life where her worth was conditional. She knew, with a heavy heart, that this was the beginning of a new, painful chapter, one where she would have to redefine what happiness truly meant, far away from the sterling name. The days bled into weeks, each one a testament to Emily's resolve, yet tinged with an ache she couldn't quite shake. Michael's attempts at reconciliation became more frantic, almost desperate. He would call relentlessly, send long, rambling texts, and even show up at her apartment building, waiting downstairs. Sarah, ever vigilant, often intercepted these attempts, acting as a buffer, a protective shield around her friend. "He just doesn't get it, Em," Sarah would say, her jaw tight. "He thinks an apology from his father or a new ring will fix everything. He still doesn't see that the problem is him and his inability to stand up for you." Emily knew Sarah was right, but the weight of severing such a significant relationship was immense. She had envisioned a future with Michael, a home, a family. Now, that vision lay shattered, replaced by the stark reality of her empty apartment and the unsettling silence that sometimes filled it. One evening, staring out her window at the city lights, a memory resurfaced, sharp and clear. It was from early in her relationship with Michael, a seemingly trivial detail she had almost forgotten. They were at a charity gala hosted by Richard Sterling, a grand affair with politicians and influential business people. Emily, feeling slightly out of place in her modest dress, had overheard Richard making a dismissive comment about a waitress who had accidentally spilled a drink. "Clumsy and unrefined," he'd muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Michael, standing beside his father, had simply chuckled, a nervous, almost imperceptible sound, and changed the subject. At the time, Emily had dismissed it, attributing it to Richard's difficult personality. Now, the memory resonated with a chilling clarity. It was a seed planted long ago, a quiet warning that Michael's passivity in the face of his father's cruelty was not a new development, but a deep-seated pattern. He had always chosen his father's peace over justice, his comfort over principles. The immediate aftermath of the engagement dinner had left Emily in a state of emotional turmoil. She cycled through anger, sadness, and a profound sense of injustice. Her sleep was restless, punctuated by vivid dreams of the restaurant, Michael's silent gaze, and Richard's mocking words. She felt a deep internal conflict. Part of her longed for the comfort of familiarity, the easy companionship she shared with Michael before the unraveling. Another, stronger part, knew that compromising her dignity for that comfort would be a slow, agonizing death of her spirit. She thought of her grandmother's weathered hands, always busy, always working, embodying a quiet strength. "Never let anyone make you feel small, Emily," her grandmother had once told her, "for you are as vast as the sky." This phrase became a mantra, a silent shield against the encroaching doubt. Her friends and colleagues at the hospital offered their support, some with knowing glances, others with direct words of encouragement. Dr. Eris, a kind, older physician Emily admired, had simply said, "Sometimes, walking away is the bravest thing you can do, Emily. It means you value yourself enough to not settle for less than you deserve." These words resonated deeply, giving her strength to navigate the incessant pressure from Michael. He wasn't just trying to win her back, he was trying to restore a version of his life that appeased his father. He'd even hinted that his father might help Emily financially if she returned, a suggestion that felt like another insult, proving he still saw her primarily through the lens of her perceived lack of wealth. One particularly difficult afternoon, Michael arrived unannounced at her apartment door, looking disheveled and genuinely distraught. He pleaded, "Emily, please, my mother. She's heartbroken. She keeps saying you were the best thing that ever happened to me. Don't you see? My father's wrong about you. I just need you to believe me." His words were laced with desperation, but Emily saw the underlying current. He wasn't just begging for her, but for his mother's peace, for his own comfort. He needed her to be the solution to his problems, not recognizing the deep wound she carried. The sight of his vulnerability was almost enough to sway her, a tiny flicker of the old affection stirring within her. But then she remembered the nervous laugh, the crushing silence at the dinner table. It was a chasm that could not be easily bridged. This was not about love, not anymore. This was about self-preservation. She knew, with a certainty that solidified in her gut, that any attempt to reconcile now would only lead to further heartbreak, a deeper descent into a life where her worth was constantly negotiated, where her voice would always be secondary to the booming authority of his father. The solution, she realized with a heavy heart, was still impossibly distant, perhaps even non-existent. Just as Emily felt herself teetering on the edge of emotional exhaustion, a peculiar shift occurred. The persistent calls from Michael began to dwindle, replaced by an unexpected visitor. One afternoon, a discreet black car pulled up to her apartment building. Eleanor Sterling, Michael's mother, stepped out. Emily's heart did a strange flip. Eleanor, usually so perfectly composed, looked fragile, her eyes holding a depth of sorrow Emily hadn't noticed before. "Emily, dear," Eleanor began, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "May I come in? I need to speak with you, away from everything." Emily, surprised by the directness and the raw emotion in Eleanor's voice, hesitantly agreed. Inside Emily's simple living room, Eleanor seemed to shrink. She looked around, not with disdain, but with a wistful gaze, as if seeing a reflection of a life she once knew, or perhaps yearned for. Eleanor then began to speak, her words flowing slowly at first, then gaining a quiet intensity. "What happened at the dinner? It was unforgivable. Richard, he is a difficult man, always has been, but his behavior was beyond the pale." She paused, her gaze meeting Emily's, filled with a profound sadness. "And Michael, my son, his silence broke my heart too. Not just for you, but for him. He is so afraid of his father, Emily. More than you can imagine." Emily listened, a knot forming in her stomach. This was an unexpected turn. She had always seen Eleanor as part of the problem, an enabler of Richard's dominance. Then Eleanor did something Emily never anticipated. She reached into her elegant handbag and pulled out a small, intricately carved wooden bird. "This was my grandmother's," Eleanor explained, her voice thick with emotion. She always said it represented freedom, being able to fly, even from a gilded cage. She then began to tell Emily a story that echoed Emily's own painful experience. Eleanor had married Richard Young, from a family of modest means. Richard's father, much like Richard himself, had been openly disdainful of her background, calling her an ambitious little sparrow trying to nest with eagles. Sihidui. Michael's grandfather had also made it clear that Eleanor was never good enough for his son, a sentiment that Richard had apparently internalized and passed on. Eleanor confessed to years of feeling small, of trying to live up to impossible standards, of seeing Michael succumb to the same pressures she had faced. She recounted countless times when Richard would publicly belittle her, and how her own mother, a strong woman, had tried to warn her about his controlling nature before she married him. She spoke of her own regret, her deep sorrow at not having found the courage to leave when she was younger, when Michael was just a child. "I stayed," Eleanor said, her voice barely audible, "for Michael. I told myself it was for him, but in truth, I was afraid. Afraid of losing everything, afraid of starting over." Eleanor's confession was a revelation, a raw, painful truth that forged an unexpected connection between the two women. Emily saw not just Michael's mother, but a reflection of her own potential future had she stayed. Eleanor looked at the wooden bird in her hand. "My greatest regret is not teaching Michael to be truly independent, to stand up for what is right, even against his own father. I let fear dictate our lives." She then looked at Emily, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Don't make my mistake, dear. Don't let anyone dim your light. You are strong, Emily, stronger than I ever was." She pressed the wooden bird into Emily's hand. "Keep it. Let it remind you of your own freedom." This unexpected gesture, this raw outpouring of truth, shifted something within Emily. It was a false hope, perhaps, a fleeting thought that maybe Michael, with his mother's help, could truly change. The symbol of the bird, once representing Eleanor's lost freedom, now seemed to Emily a beacon of her own. A strange, fragile hope blossomed in Emily's chest, mingled with a new understanding of Michael's deeply ingrained fear. Perhaps, she thought, with his mother's backing, with the understanding that his own family was also suffering under Richard's tyranny, Michael might finally find the courage to confront his father, to truly stand up for himself and for her. This small, fragile hope led her to a new decision, one that mixed both hope and danger. She decided to meet Michael one last time, not for reconciliation, but to see if he could truly understand the depth of his inaction, to see if he was capable of a genuine, self-initiated change, rather than merely responding to his mother's pleas. She felt a surge of nervous energy, a desperate need for closure, for an answer to the burning question of whether Michael could ever be the man she needed him to be. The stakes were higher than ever, for this final meeting would either solidify her independence or drag her back into a world she no longer belonged. The meeting with Michael took place a few days later, in a quiet park, far from the prying eyes of society and the imposing presence of the Sterling mansion. Emily chose the location deliberately, a neutral ground where she hoped the raw truth, stripped of gilded pretenses, might finally emerge. Michael arrived looking weary, his usual tailored clothes slightly rumpled, his eyes shadowed. He started, predictably, with another round of apologies, but this time there was a tentative shift. He spoke of his mother's visit, of Eleanor's painful confessions, and for the first time, Emily sensed a genuine flicker of introspection in his words. "My mother, she told me things," he admitted, his voice low, "about how my grandfather treated her, how my father picked up that same behavior, and how I've been doing the same to you, by letting it happen." This admission, however small, felt like a positive shift, a crack in the formidable wall of his denial. He then presented a plan, one that seemed to offer a glimmer of real progress. "I told my father," Michael stated, his gaze meeting hers with a newfound firmness, "that if he doesn't apologize to you sincerely and acknowledge his wrongdoing, I will step away from the family business for a while. I need to figure out who I am, separate from his influence." He even suggested they attend therapy together, a suggestion that, coming from him, was astonishing. Emily, holding the small wooden bird Eleanor had given her, felt a surge of cautious optimism. Could this be it? Could Michael finally be breaking free from the suffocating grip of his father's expectations? The seed that Eleanor had planted, the hope for Michael's eventual liberation, seemed to be bearing fruit. He appeared genuinely distraught by the pain he had caused, and the thought of him confronting his formidable father, even if it meant risking his inheritance, seemed like a monumental step for him. For a moment, the old dream of a life with Michael, but a Michael who was truly his own man, flickered brightly. The positive feeling intensified over the next few weeks. Michael began to keep his distance from his father, opting for phone calls rather than face-to-face meetings. A significant defiance in the Sterling household. He started therapy, and even though Emily hadn't rejoined him, he shared insights, acknowledging his deep-seated fear of his father's disapproval. He spoke of the emotional manipulation he had endured since childhood, how his father had meticulously crafted him into a docile heir, and how his silence at the dinner was a deeply ingrained, almost automatic response to avoid conflict with Richard. Emily started to believe, truly believe, that he was trying. She even allowed herself to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, they could salvage something from the wreckage, that their relationship could be rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect and Michael's newfound strength. The little wooden bird felt lighter in her hand, a symbol not just of freedom, but of the possibility of a shared flight. Then came the devastating blow. It arrived not from Michael directly, but through a cold, impersonal letter delivered to her apartment. It was from the Sterling family lawyers. The letter stated in stark, legalistic terms that due to unforeseen circumstances and irreconcilable differences, the planned engagement was officially dissolved. It also included a detailed list of expenses incurred for the cancelled wedding and a demand for a portion of those costs, citing a breach of contract on Emily's part for withdrawing from the engagement. The shock was immediate and paralyzing. Emily reread the words, her mind reeling. Breach of contract? She was the one who had been publicly humiliated, the one who had walked away with nothing but her dignity. The sheer audacity, the callousness of it, was breathtaking. Her hands trembled as she clutched the letter, the paper crinkling under her furious grip. This wasn't Michael's doing. This was Richard Sterling, a final brutal attempt to control, to punish, to humiliate her even further, using legal tactics as his weapon. He wasn't just dissolving an engagement. He was trying to erase her, to make her pay for daring to defy him. The hope she had nurtured, the belief in Michael's burgeoning independence, shattered into a million pieces. The subtle mention in the letter of significant financial losses to the Sterling family due to the abrupt termination of the engagement underscored Richard's true motive. Not just control, but absolute dominance. The entire situation felt like a cruel joke, a calculated move to ensure she would never forget her place. This legal assault was more than just a demand for money. It was a character assassination, a public declaration that she was nothing more than a liability, a discarded object. The momentum she had felt, the sense of moving forward, was suddenly obliterated, replaced by a suffocating wave of despair. The ground beneath her feet seemed to give way, plunging her into a chasm of utter devastation. The legal letter was a cold, calculated strike that sent Emily spiraling into a deep chasm of despair. The fragile hope she had clung to, the belief in Michael's capacity for change, was not just broken, but utterly pulverized. The demand for payment, couched in legal jargon, felt like a final vindictive act by Richard Sterling, a brutal reminder of his power and his contempt for her. Emily felt a profound sense of injustice, a burning rage that mixed with the bitter taste of defeat. She hadn't just lost a fiancé, she was now facing a legal battle, a public shaming that threatened to stain her reputation and deplete her meager savings. The world, which had just begun to show her a sliver of kindness, suddenly seemed vast and unforgiving. For days, Emily barely left her apartment. The vibrant city outside her window seemed to mock her internal desolation. She neglected her shifts at the hospital, calling in sick with a vague explanation that barely concealed her emotional collapse. Sarah, sensing the depth of her friend's pain, became a constant presence, bringing food, offering a listening ear, and tirelessly researching legal options. "This is outrageous, Em," Sarah fumed, pacing Emily's small living room, a stack of legal papers in her hand. "It's a bullying tactic, pure and simple. Richard Sterling is trying to break you. See." But even Sarah's unwavering support couldn't fully penetrate the fog of Emily's despondency. Emily felt utterly helpless, trapped in a nightmare she hadn't asked for. The wooden bird, once a symbol of liberation, now lay forgotten on her bedside table, its promise of freedom feeling like a cruel mockery. In her lowest moments, a new and dangerous thought began to take root. What if she just gave in? What if she paid the absurd amount just to make it all go away, to regain some semblance of peace? The thought was fleeting, shameful, but it surfaced again and again, a desperate plea for an end to the torment. She considered calling Michael, not out of love, but out of a desperate need to understand how he could let his father do this, how he could remain silent while she was being financially and emotionally ravaged. She longed for him to intervene, to stop the legal assault, to prove that his earlier words of regret were genuine. This longing was a profound mistake, a misguided hope that a man who had failed to defend her publicly would somehow find the courage to shield her from his father's legal machinery. It was a lapse, a moment of weakness where her pain clouded her judgment, making her forget the fundamental truth she had learned at the engagement dinner. Michael would always prioritize his father's approval and his family's comfort over her well-being. One evening, lost in her despair, she almost sent a text message to Michael, a plea for him to make his father stop. Her finger hovered over the send button, a desperate act from a woman pushed to her absolute limit. She typed, "Michael, please, you have to make him stop. I can't take this anymore." But just as she was about to send it, the image of his nervous laugh at the dinner table flashed in her mind, vivid and unsettling. She remembered his inability to meet her gaze, his father's cruel words hanging in the air. The words her grandmother had whispered, "Dignity cannot be bought, it is carried," echoed in her mind. Sending that message would be a final surrender of that dignity, a plea for rescue from the very person who had failed her once before. It would reinforce Richard's narrative, that she was indeed dependent, weak, and ultimately a victim who could be bought or intimidated. The thought of Michael seeing her broken, begging for his intervention, solidified her resolve. She would not give him that satisfaction. She would not let Richard Sterling win. Slowly, painstakingly, Emily deleted the message. The act was small, but significant. It was a recognition that she was truly at rock bottom, stripped bare of all illusions. The symbol of the wooden bird lying on her table felt heavy with the weight of her choice, a choice to not compromise her self-worth, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. This was her deepest plunge, the absolute lowest point. The path forward was still shrouded in darkness, but for the first time in days, a tiny, almost imperceptible shift occurred within her. A faint whisper of resilience, a suggestion that even from the depths of despair, she might find the strength to rise again. The answer, however, was not yet clear, and the immediate future remained bleak. Just when the darkness seemed absolute, a surprising solution emerged from the most unexpected corner. Not through Michael, but through Eleanor Sterling. A week after the legal letter arrived, an unmarked envelope appeared in Emily's mailbox. Inside, a single, elegant letter. It was from Eleanor. The note was brief, yet potent. It informed Emily that Eleanor had quietly transferred a significant sum of money, more than enough to cover the alleged expenses and any potential legal fees, into a trust account in Emily's name. The message was clear. This is not from Richard. This is from me. Consider it restitution for the dignity you were robbed of, and a plea for my own peace. Please, do not refuse. It is the least I can do. Eleanor also attached a copy of a letter she had sent to the Sterling family lawyers, officially withdrawing her consent for any legal action against Emily, citing personal and emotional distress caused by the situation. She subtly hinted at exposing Richard's manipulative tactics within the family business if the lawyers pursued the matter further. It was a silent, powerful rebellion. A mother finally standing up, not just for herself, but for the wronged dignity she recognized in Emily. The revelation hit Emily with the force of a tidal wave. It was an act of profound courage from a woman who had, for so long, seemed trapped. Eleanor's quiet intervention not only provided financial relief, but, more importantly, a searing validation of Emily's ordeal. The bitter taste of injustice began to recede, replaced by a profound sense of vindication. The last seed planted, the symbol of Eleanor's hidden strength and silent regret, had finally bloomed, directly leading to the resolution. This wasn't about money. It was about one woman recognizing another's suffering and choosing to act, breaking free from her own gilded cage. Armed with Eleanor's quiet support and Sarah's unwavering legal expertise, Emily felt a surge of renewed strength. Sarah, after reviewing the legal documents, confirmed that Eleanor's actions had effectively nullified the Sterling family's claim, leaving them with no legal standing. The threat of public humiliation and financial ruin dissolved, replaced by a quiet triumph. There was no need for a dramatic confrontation with Richard. Eleanor's subtle yet firm defiance had already disarmed him. 6 months later, life for Emily had transformed in quiet, profound ways. She still worked as a dedicated nurse, but her shifts now felt lighter, unburdened by the weight of a painful past. She had found a modest, charming little house with a small garden on the outskirts of the city, a place she could truly call her own. It wasn't luxurious, but it was filled with her own laughter, her own quiet joys, and the unmistakable scent of freedom. The small wooden bird, given to her by Eleanor, now sat proudly on her mantelpiece, a daily reminder of the cages people build for themselves and the strength it takes to break free. It was no longer just Eleanor's symbol, it was Emily's, a testament to her journey of self-discovery and resilience. One crisp autumn afternoon, Emily found herself in a bustling downtown cafe, enjoying a rare day off. As she waited for her coffee, a familiar figure entered, Michael. He saw her across the crowded room, and their eyes met. There was no awkwardness, no anger, just a quiet understanding. He approached her table, a hesitant smile on his face. "Emily," he said, his voice softer than she remembered. They talked for a while, about their lives, about the changes. He spoke of his ongoing therapy, of the difficult but necessary distance he had created with his father. He acknowledged, with a sincerity that was finally genuine, his past failures. "I'm truly sorry, Emily," he confessed, his gaze steady. "Not just for what happened, but for who I was, for not having the courage then. I lost someone incredible because I wasn't strong enough to be myself." There was no bitterness in his voice, only a profound sense of regret. Emily listened, truly listened, and for the first time felt no pain, no resentment. As he turned to leave, Michael paused. "You look happy, Emily. Truly happy." She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. "I am, Michael. I really am." The wooden bird on her mantelpiece, the symbol of dignity and freedom, resonated deeply within her. She understood then. Her happy ending wasn't with the man she thought she would marry, but with the woman she had become. The greatest act of love was choosing herself, walking away from where respect was absent, and rebuilding her life on a foundation of unshakable self-worth. It was the quiet triumph of a woman who dared to prioritize her dignity above all else, proving that sometimes the most profound journey is the one taken alone, towards oneself. What profound lesson did this emotional story teach you? And you? Have you ever gone through something similar? Comment below. I want to know. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to contribute even more, you can buy me a coffee on Buy Me a Coffee. Just point your phone camera at the QR code on the screen or check the first comment. Any amount, however small, helps me a lot with channel expenses. Thanks for your company and see you in the next story.